As you go the way of life, you will see a great chasm. Jump. It is not as wide as you think. Joseph Campbell, author. Experience 7. Unicorn Shapeshifter. December 1st, 2021. Around 7 a.m. to 7:11 a.m. Recently, I've been lamenting the fact that it's been over 6 weeks since my last encounter. I've gotten accustomed to their frequent visits, and that felt like a long time. Feeling abandoned by the ETs like they'd forgotten me or lost interest. All the sorts of things that go through one's mind when someone makes you feel special and then cuts you off without explanation. I was having an incredibly restless night, as is typical just before these types of experiences, and sometime around 7 a.m., I'm guessing, I awoke to that very familiar yet extremely subtle feeling just before the ringing in the ear starts. There's a quality to the air that shifts, and the pressure changes slightly, and the detection of a hint of a presence in the room. And then I feel myself slipping into a deep meditative state, much quicker than I could achieve on my own. In the same way that achieving a deeper meditative state is much easier in the morning than in the middle of the day. Because having already been asleep just minutes ago, you're already much closer to that state than you would be if you tried it from a completely awakened state. I think the ETs use this as a way to piggyback off of that process, using the momentum from my sleep state in order to tune my consciousness into their reality. It may even be that for me, this is the only way that they can do it. So as I felt myself slipping into the altered state, and the ringing in my right ear started up as expected, I could feel my astral body sinking into my physical body, sort of peeling away from the energetic adhesive of the inner walls of my physical body. And once I was completely detached, I began floating upwards towards the ceiling. I tried opening my eyes like last time in Experience 6, but I couldn't. What I noticed that was different from the other times was that when I began floating upwards, it felt like I passed through some sort of energetic membrane, rather than being transported somewhere entirely different, as though I was being pulled out of a bubble that I previously didn't know I was surrounded by. As this happened, I lost consciousness, and when I awoke outside of the membrane, everything looked exactly like my bedroom, and for all I knew it was. But something felt different. It was the distinct feeling of having traveled somewhere, and yet the surroundings remained unchanged. Immediately upon arriving in this altered state, an entity jumped on top of me and held me down with its hands on both my upper arms. I began trying to fight it, but it had me in some sort of sleep paralysis type state. I started speaking to the entity telepathically, since I couldn't open my mouth. With all of my focus and might, I pulled all of my mental energy together in the center of my forehead and directed it towards the entity, with the feeling that I was blasting him with a megaphone from my mind, and I sent him these words: "I am stronger than you," and I just kept repeating that. I eventually freed my right arm and was able to grab the entity's left arm. I felt the sandpaper-like texture of its skin and worked my hand up towards its shoulder to try and push it off of me, but it wouldn't budge. At some point, I must have been able to free both of my arms, because the next thing I remember, I was grabbing its head in my hands, and it was at this point that I realized it had a huge horn on its forehead, which was quite a shock. This was the closest thing I've ever seen to a stereotypical demon or a reptilian-like entity. Its skin was a coppery orange color. It was humanoid and wore no clothing that I could see. The horn was definitely comprised of bone, as it would be on any animal. I can't recall its face, but it wasn't a human face. It was much more like some creature from a Guillermo del Toro movie, with no eyes, no nose, and just a mouth with sharp teeth and a horn protruding from its forehead. All of my curiosity about its physiology and what alien race it might belong to was all I could think about in the few seconds I had to take in its appearance. But of course, I should have known. It was a shapeshifter. As soon as I grabbed its head, it immediately became like a balloon, deflating in my hands. I could feel the texture of its skin, but inside it was hollow, like a multi-dimensional lizard or snake shedding its skin in order to escape. This husk of skin then morphed into a rubbery, horse-shaped object, and the color changed from the coppery orange color of its skin to a semi-glossy synthetic-looking purple. It flailed and flopped in my hands like a kind of silicone object you might find in a sex shop, and I believe this comparison is exactly what the entity intended to conjure in me, like some sort of prank. I immediately dropped it on the floor, and it disappeared, although I don't remember exactly how that happened. I just remember that I rolled back over into bed, mystified, and just sort of catching my breath. I have no recollection of shifting from the other reality to an awakened state. It was non-existent. It was as if the whole thing really happened in my room in an awake state, but I knew it couldn't have. I looked at the clock on my phone when it was over, and it was 7:11 a.m. Suffice it to say, that was a long 11 minutes. Afterthoughts. Obviously, there isn't a wild narrative to unpack here, as with many of the other experiences. But I do have to wonder why this entity was attacking me, and why it chose a horse as the totem for its cryptic message. The fact that it was purple, and evoked the feeling of a sex toy seems very significant, even though I can't seem to figure out what it means. Being a shapeshifter, it must have chosen its original appearance as well. The orangey horned monster. I hesitate to put this in writing, but if we consider the connection between a big phallic horn and the slang expression of being horny, could the message it was trying to send have all been a big joke? Or, from another perhaps deeper perspective, a unicorn is just a horse without a horn, so maybe it was symbolic of me defeating him, in that I vanquished his defenses, leaving a limp, defeated, hornless horse behind. And the transformation from orange, the sacral chakra, to purple, the crown chakra, is also symbolic of ascending from lower energies to more enlightened cosmic ones. When I zoom out and look at these experiences as part of some larger process, I imagine that this was yet another initiation by the beings at large. At first, the entity presented itself as horrific and hostile, but then retreated into a lifeless, absurd, and benign object once I chose to show strength, rather than submit to whatever it was there to do, which may have been a way of communicating to me that I had successfully completed the challenge. This is how I make sense out of all of these unexplainable phenomenal things that I experience. And while the integration process of all this is extremely challenging at times, I can't help but feel thirsty for more. My attitude is always, you think you can break me? Bring it on. Because ultimately, I think they're testing me. I don't know why or what for, but even if I never get an answer, I always appreciate the exchange, regardless of their bizarre and mind-bending methods of communication.